Beloved, chosen ones. This is not just another message, it's a spiritual alert, a divine court proceeding, a heavenly ruling that's already underway. The gavel is in God's hand, and the verdict unshakable. You see, when heaven decides it's time for justice, no defense team can talk their way out. No ritual can reverse it. No earthly wealth can buy a delay. And some of you reading this right now, you've been waiting, praying, crying in secret, wondering when the scales would balance. Well, this is your confirmation. Heaven heard you. Not just the words you prayed, but the tears, the silence, the breath you held while they tried to take everything from you. Thank you to every single chosen one who has stood by this message, this channel, this movement of truth, to those who have supported through super thanks. Your generosity doesn't just sustain the platform, it helps pour messages like this into hearts all over the world. And if you haven't given, know this, your presence is still deeply honored. You're not here by accident. You are part of a global remnant waking up to their spiritual inheritance. Whether you donate or not, you are seen, loved, and valued, and we're walking this path together. Now lean in, because this isn't about gossip or getting even, it's about divine justice. And let's be honest, have you ever noticed how the wicked get loudest right before the fall? How the manipulators seem boldest before they're exposed? It's not a coincidence, it's a pattern, like a storm gathering right before it breaks. They think their charm can fool the Most High, that their schemes, their titles, their staged smiles can impress the judge of all creation. But God doesn't get distracted. He doesn't get bought. And he doesn't need a court date to render judgment. Here's the terrifying and beautiful truth. The moment they tried to silence you, humiliate you, destroy you, they unknowingly activated their own collapse. That's the law of the Spirit. That's divine order. You didn't need to fight back with fists. You didn't need to scream or post about it online. Your silence was not surrender, it was strategy. While they were scheming, heaven was writing. While they were networking, heaven was recording. And while they were laughing, thinking you were done, God was already preparing your resurrection and their reckoning. So let this be your bold reminder. You are not weak. You are not forgotten. You are not defenseless. You are divinely protected. Your suffering was not wasted. It was logged into heaven's court system. And now, the sentencing is in motion. Chosen one. Type 777 in the comments if you're ready for the truth to roar louder than the lies. If you know this message is for you, let the algorithm and the angels know you are awake, aware, and unafraid. Because this isn't about petty revenge. This is about reckoning. And trust me, when God moves, it's not symbolic, it's final. Let's talk about it. God's chosen ones. They tried to end you now. God's justice is sending them to jail. Number 1. Divine restraint is not divine absence. God was aiming. Chosen one. Have you ever looked around and asked yourself, why hasn't God dealt with them yet? You saw the lies. You felt the betrayal. You endured the humiliation. And yet for a long time it looked like nothing was happening. But let me tell you something that only the spiritually awake understand. God's silence does not mean he's sleeping. His stillness is not weakness. And his restraint is not absence, it's accuracy. Why does God wait? Why doesn't he strike immediately when you're being attacked? Because he is not moved by emotion, he is guided by eternal justice. The enemy wants quick reactions. God orchestrates perfect revelations. Let's be clear, God saw everything. Every word spoken behind your back, every trap laid in the dark, every plot whispered in secret, none of it escaped him. But instead of responding in our human timing, he decided to let the wicked expose themselves fully. Why? Because exposure without interference creates undeniable guilt. And when judgment finally comes, there's no spin, nor manipulation, no sympathy act that can cover it. Psalm 37:13 says, "The Lord laughs at the wicked, for he knows their day is coming." Oh, chosen one, their day is coming, and some of them feel it in their bones. That anxiety they carry now, that's not guilt, it's spiritual awareness that judgment is approaching. Think about this. What if God had acted immediately? The guilty would have played the victim. The narcissist would have cried. The community might have believed them. But God waited until the mask slipped by their own hand. Now, there is no confusion about who was wrong. That's not delay. That's divine brilliance. Take the example of Harvey Weinstein. For decades, he seemed untouchable, protected by power, prestige, and silence. But when justice came, it wasn't just for one victim, it was for the system that allowed the abuse to thrive. God isn't just punishing individuals in your life. He's dismantling the entire structure that allowed your enemies to move against you in the first place. That takes time. That takes layers. That takes heaven's kind of strategy. Eclesiastes 3:17 reminds us, God will bring into judgment both the righteous and the wicked. For there will be a time for every activity, a time to judge every deed. End of chosen one. You were never forgotten. You were being studied. While they were flexing, mocking, and running their mouths, God was collecting evidence. While they were getting bold in their wickedness, God was letting the rope get longer, not to bless them, but to let them hang themselves with it. Consider Nelson Mandela. The apartheid regime thought silencing him with prison would end his influence. But God had a different plan. The longer Mandela sat in that cell, the more heaven set the stage for him to return, not as a prisoner, but as a president. God's delay is often his preparation. So don't be discouraged when it seems like evil is prospering. Ask yourself, could it be that God is preparing something so public, so final, so undeniable that no one can argue against it when it falls? Proverbs 21:15 declares, when justice is done, it brings joy to the righteous, but terror to evildoers. And that's exactly what's happening now. The ones who once laughed are now paranoid. The ones who once strutted with boldness now second-guess every move. Why? Because they know, deep down. They know not because you've said anything, but because God's presence has shifted the atmosphere. Remember Amber Heard and Johnny Depp? The media had already crowned her the victim, but God allowed time, testimony, and truth to overturn the narrative. Chosen one. In the same way, God is rewriting the story they tried to write about you. Isaiah 30:18 speaks directly to your heart. Yet the Lord longs to be gracious to you. Therefore he will rise up to show you compassion, for the Lord is a God of justice. Blessed are all who wait for him. You didn't imagine it. You weren't overreacting. The pain was real. The attack was calculated, but so was the rescue. And now, the divine restraint that looked like silence is revealing itself as a targeted strike. God wasn't just protecting you. He was exposing them. Let me ask you this, chosen one. What if the waiting wasn't punishment, but proof that your story would become a testimony that could never be twisted again? That's what's unfolding now. And when God finally moves, it's not just to fix the surface, it's to uproot the rot beneath it. Number 2. Their hands weren't tied. They were spiritually overruled. Chosen one. It might have looked like they walked away. It might have seemed like they gave up or got distracted. But don't be fooled, they didn't stop because they changed. They stopped because they were stopped. Let me ask you, have you ever witnessed someone try to destroy you with full confidence, only to watch their plans mysteriously collapse? That wasn't coincidence. That was divine interference. The truth is, they didn't pause because they got scared. They didn't grow a conscience overnight. They ran into a force they couldn't manipulate, a wall they couldn't climb, a fire they couldn't walk through, and that force was God. Isaiah 54:17 says, "No weapon formed against you shall prosper, and every tongue which rises against you, in judgment you shall condemn." God didn't need to use thunder or lightning. His quiet authority was enough. Every time they plotted, God blocked it. Every time they twisted truth, God confused their plans. Every door they tried to force open closed in their faces, not because you fought back, but because heaven stepped in. Consider Joseph in the book of Genesis. His brothers threw him into a pit. He was falsely accused and imprisoned, yet the plan to destroy him led to his rise to power. Why? Because God allowed the enemy's plan to collapse under its own weight. Real-life example. Think of Tupac Shakur, an artist targeted, shot, and often surrounded by betrayal. Yet despite the chaos, his influence grew far beyond what his enemies intended. The system couldn't silence him, it amplified his message. And even after death, his voice still shakes the culture. Your enemies thought they could silence you too. They had a detailed plan: smear your name, ruin your influence, maybe even take your life. But what happened instead? Their strategies worked on others, but not on you. Why? Because you're not ordinary. You're chosen. Romans 8:31 powerfully says, "If God is for us, who can be against us?" And that truth broke their confidence. Do you remember how Bill Cosby's carefully hidden abuse was eventually exposed after decades? Or how Jeffrey Epstein, despite his wealth and power, couldn't escape divine timing? These stories are reminders. No one is beyond God's reach. No influence can outmaneuver divine justice. They didn't walk away from their attack on you. They hit a wall. A wall built by angels. A wall enforced by the Spirit of the living God. They couldn't finish what they started. Not because you retaliated, but because someone intervened. Chosen one. Let this settle in your spirit. God didn't stop them to protect them. He stopped them to prove to you that they never had the power they pretended to hold. Job 5:12 declares, He thwarts the plans of the crafty, so that their hands achieve no success. They feel it now. That sense of exposure, that unsettling silence. They're not praying, they're panicking, not because of guilt, but because of the realization that they touched someone protected by God. You didn't survive by luck. You survived because you were spiritually covered. Let me ask you, what if their inability to finish you off is the loudest evidence that God was defending you all along? 2 Thessalonians 1-6 brings it full circle. God is just. He will pay back trouble to those who trouble you. Amen. So now, chosen one, you're not just free. You're standing in the aftermath of supernatural warfare. Victorious, not because you fought harder, but because you were defended by heaven's decree. Number 3. You were the bait, not the victim, and that's why justice is inevitable. Chosen one. Let's make one thing abundantly clear from the beginning. They didn't trap you, they trapped themselves. The moment they thought you were vulnerable, they didn't realize they were stepping into a divine setup, crafted not by your hands, but by God's. You looked cornered. You looked powerless. You looked like easy prey. And that's what deceived them. But you were never the prey, you were the proof. You weren't in danger. You were the bait in heaven's courtroom. And every move they made against you was being recorded as spiritual evidence. Have you ever wondered why you didn't have to retaliate? Why you never had to raise your voice, expose them, or seek revenge? Why your silence carried more weight than their threats? It's because God was already working behind the scenes, and every time they struck you, they were striking against a force far bigger than you. They were attacking a mantle, not just a person. Just like Queen Esther was positioned in the palace not to enjoy comfort, but to expose a plot. So were you. Haman believed he was winning. He strutted in pride, convinced he had silenced the threat. But the gallows he built for Mordecai became the very weapon of his own demise. Is it possible, chosen one, that your endurance was never weakness but strategy, that your tears were not wasted but counted, that your patience was the very tool God used to let them tie their own noose? Psalm 7:15-16 says, "Whoever digs a hole and scoops it out falls into the pit they have made. The trouble they cause recoils on them. Their violence comes down on their own heads." That is what's unfolding around you right now. Their curses are bouncing back, their manipulations are collapsing, and their intentions have exposed them more than any trial ever could. Look at real-world examples. Elizabeth Holmes, once hailed as a revolutionary tech CEO, built Theranos on lies. Her image was clean, her ambition impressive, but everything she touched eventually betrayed her deception. Why? Because even the slickest scheme cannot escape the timing of truth. And so it is with those who tried to dismantle you. They touched what was holy while pretending you were weak. But their undoing was not your voice. It was their arrogance. Chosen one. Do you realize how powerful it is that you didn't need to do anything drastic for their collapse to begin? You didn't need to threaten or perform. You just needed to stay anchored in your assignment. That's how powerful God's covering is. They thought your silence was surrender, but it was a trap being baited with stillness. They couldn't see the spiritual surveillance surrounding you. They thought they were acting in secret, but heaven saw everything. Proverbs 26:27 declares, "Whoever digs a pit will fall into it. If someone rolls a stone, it will roll back on them." They rolled that stone, didn't they? And now it's crushing the very reputation they tried to elevate. The irony, you never had to push. You just had to hold your peace. Let's look at Lance Armstrong. Once idolized in the world of sports, he silenced critics, manipulated narratives, and denied truth for years. But the very system he used to dominate the world stage eventually became the spotlight that revealed his deception. Why? Because divine setups often look like long silences until the moment of exposure is inescapable. And when it comes, it's not keyed. It's public. It's undeniable. It's final. Chosen one. Think back. How many times did you cry in silence, wondering why God didn't stop them sooner? But what if those very moments were God placing you exactly where the enemy would reveal himself most foolishly? You weren't being humiliated. You were being positioned for divine reversal. Romans 12:19 gives us this promise: "Do not take revenge. my dear friends. But leave room for God's wrath. For it is written, "It is mine to avenge, I will repay," says the Lord. That repayment is not just emotional, it's systematic. He is repaying them with confusion, with exposure, with implosion. Because that's what happens when people touch His anointed and assume there will be no consequences. Remember the story of Bernie Madoff, the man who built an empire of wealth through fraud. At first, it looked flawless. Then came the unraveling, and what began as whispers ended in prison. He wasn't destroyed by opposition. He was undone by the very empire he built. That's what happens when deception goes unchecked for too long. And that's the path of those who plotted against you. Let this sink in. You were never being punished. You were being preserved. God didn't abandon you. He anchored you. Your endurance wasn't for their entertainment. It was the slow drip that exposed their rot. You were the mirror they couldn't manipulate, the presence that made their darkness tremble. And now, as their carefully crafted lives unravel, they don't even know how to cover it up. Why? Because God baited them into exposing themselves. Isaiah 41, 10 says, "So do not fear, for I am with you. Do not be dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you and help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand." That's why you're still standing. That's why your soul is intact. That's why, despite the poison, your roots are healthy. And the greatest proof of all, they can't even lie effectively anymore. The people around them are starting to see their masks are cracking, their alliances are falling apart, and they're spiraling not because you exposed them, but because they were baited into exposing themselves. The trap was spiritual, the setup was divine, and you, chosen one, were never the victim. You were the trigger that unleashed justice. Number 4. God didn't save you quietly. He made their downfall thunderous. Chosen one. There's something you need to understand about God's style. He doesn't always whisper when He delivers justice. Sometimes, He orchestrates a spectacle, not to embarrass you, but to expose them, not to shame you, but to remind the world that you were never abandoned, never overlooked, and never weak. Have you ever noticed how your peace disturbs people who once had power over you? How your calm demeanor now unsettles the very people who tried to see you broken? That's not just psychological, that's prophetic. That's not just personal, that's strategic. They thought God would rescue you quietly. They expected a silent recovery, something they could deny or dismiss. But instead, God left you, standing in the exact place they tried to bury you, unbothered, unshaken, and undeniably blessed. Look at the life of Monica Lewinsky, once humiliated on the world stage. For years, her name was synonymous with scandal, but now she's a respected voice against cyberbullying, with a legacy built on dignity and transparency. Her peace speaks louder than the media ever did. And so it is with you. Your stability is your loudest weapon. Your existence is your evidence. Psalm 23:5 captures it perfectly. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows. That's not privacy, that's a public revelation. And every day you walk in peace, they hear it. Every time you smile without explanation, they feel it. Every step you take in freedom is a reminder that they lost the battle they started. Let's talk about Amanda Knox, a woman accused, imprisoned, and judged by millions. For years, she was globally hated. But in the end, the truth surfaced, and now she walks free, while the system that tried to destroy her deals with the stains it left behind. God doesn't just protect his chosen ones, he restores them publicly. Because vindication must be visible. Isaiah 61:7 says, "Instead of your shame you will receive a double portion, and instead of disgrace you will rejoice in your inheritance, and so you will inherit a double portion in your land, and everlasting joy will be yours." You weren't just pulled out, you were promoted. You weren't just preserved, you were elevated. And now the very people who said you wouldn't survive must watch you thrive. Here's the most powerful part. You're not even trying to prove anything. You're not explaining. You're not defending. You're simply existing in truth. And that truth is suffocating their lies. Your peace is louder than their accusations. Your calm is louder than their chaos. John 8:32 reminds us, "Then you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free." You didn't break under the pressure, and because of that, they're breaking under the weight of their own guilt. That's not revenge. That's divine reversal, even in entertainment. Look at Brendan Fraser, once blacklisted, forgotten, and mocked, now celebrated again, not because he fought dirty, but because time and truth exposed the false narratives. You don't have to scream to be heard. When God restores, He amplifies your silence. They thought they could erase you, but God turned you into a living contradiction. Every rumor now looks foolish. Every lie now looks desperate, because you are still here, still glowing, still protected. Micah 7:8 closes this chapter perfectly. "Do not gloat over me. My enemy, though I have fallen, I will rise. Though I sit in darkness, the Lord will be my light." You are the light now. Not just because you made it through, but because your peace shines brighter than their performance. Chosen one, walk boldly, because the louder your silence gets, the closer they come to collapse, and the more they spiral, the more heaven confirms what you've known all along. You weren't just saved, you were strategically placed, so they'd have no choice but to face the truth. Number 5. Their conscience is now the cage, and they're already serving the sentence. Chosen one. You didn't have to lift a hand. You didn't have to speak a curse, file a complaint, or strike back. Why? Because the most ruthless prison isn't made of steel bars or locked gates. It's built in the mind. Long before any earthly courtroom hears their name, long before the world catches up to what they did, they are already in bondage, not because of what you did to them, but because of what their own conscience refuses to let them forget. Have you ever wondered why they suddenly look tired, agitated, or disconnected despite their external success? That's not coincidence. That's internal collapse. That's judgment without announcement. Proverbs 28:1 tells us, "The wicked flee when no one pursues, but the righteous are bold as a lion." They're not running from you, they're running from the sound of their own guilt. They're not losing sleep over fear of jail time. They're haunted by the echo of what they did to someone they now realize was protected by heaven. Guilt doesn't wait for evidence. It doesn't wait for a gavel or sentencing. Guilt shows up the moment they can no longer lie to themselves. Take Ted Haggard, for example, a prominent evangelical leader with national influence until his double life collapsed in on itself. Though legal repercussions were minimal, the emotional and spiritual devastation was permanent. Why? Because guilt doesn't just expose you publicly, it shreds you internally. And that's exactly what's happening to those who came against you. They may still post happy pictures, they may smile in public, but when the lights go out, the silence gets louder. The little voice they ignored while plotting against you, it's not whispering anymore, It's screaming. They can't drown it in distractions. They can't drink it away, shop it away, sleep it off, or talk over it. Because guilt doesn't care about your schedule. It doesn't care about your new relationship. It doesn't care how many people believe your lie. Guilt is relentless, and it knows exactly where they live. Job 15:20, -21 warns. All his days the wicked man suffers torment. Terrors overwhelm him. That's why they're jumpy. That's why they can't sit still. That's why the smallest reminder of you, your name, your voice, your resilience sends a chill through their soul. Their peace is gone, and they don't know how to get it back. Do you remember O.J. Simpson? Though he escaped conviction in the criminal court, the world watched a man haunted by whispers, shadows, and lifelong speculation. His smile never erased the tension in his eyes. Whether guilty or not in the legal sense, the weight of suspicion became a cage. He never escaped. And so it is with the ones who harmed you. The evidence of their internal sentence is written on their face: fatigue, fake joy, irrational behavior. They are living proof that judgment doesn't wait for paperwork. Chosen one, has it ever occurred to you that your silence is what makes their guilt grow louder? That your peace is the very contrast that reveals their unrest? You're not the problem, you're the proof. You're not the curse they cursed themselves when they mishandled someone under divine covering, and God is allowing that conscience to turn into a mirror they can't shatter. 2 Corinthians 4:2 says, "We have renounced secret and shameful ways. We do not use deception, but by setting forth the truth plainly, we commend ourselves to everyone's conscience." The truth is breaking them down. They tried to bury it under performance, but it rose like a phoenix in their own mind. They thought hurting you would be the end. They never expected to be haunted by it forever. Look at Lori Loughlin, the actress involved in the college admissions scandal. She thought she could buy her daughter's future, but once exposed, it wasn't the sentence that hurt, it was the humiliation, the loss of credibility, and the knowledge that her actions painted a permanent stain. And the worst part, no matter how much PR she uses, the public's memory and her own doesn't forget. The same applies to your enemies. They're not free. They're bound in a room with no windows, trapped in a cycle of replayed regret. And you, chosen one, didn't even need to retaliate. You didn't have to plot. You just had to endure. And now truth, time, and conscience are doing what no courtroom ever could. Psalm 94:23 declares, "He will repay them for their sins and destroy them for their wickedness. The Lord our God will destroy them, not always through fire, but sometimes through silence that never ends." Chosen one, ask yourself this: could it be that God's mercy toward you was also His judgment on them? That your survival was the trigger for their sentence? That every breath you breathe freely is a reminder to them of what they can no longer escape? So let the record show. They are already serving time. Not in a facility, but in a mind that won't forget. A soul that can't rest. And a life that no longer moves forward. You are free. They are not. And the justice of heaven is already at work. Number 6. The sentence is not just legal, it's cosmic and irreversible. Chosen one, let's go even deeper. What happened to you was not a random offense. It was a violation of divine law, a trespassing of spiritual order. And because of that, the judgment unfolding now is not just earthly, it's cosmic. It stretches beyond laws and human institutions. It reaches into destinies, callings, and spiritual contracts. When someone touches a chosen one, They don't just hurt a person, they oppose God's agenda. And he does not take that lightly. Galatians 6:7 says, "Do not be deceived. God is not mocked. A man reaps what he sows." They thought they could hurt you and keep reaping blessings. But God does not allow contamination to thrive. When someone sins against a divine assignment, especially one covered by purpose, the punishment affects more than just their reputation. It invades their future. Look at Saul in the Bible, who lost his entire kingship, not because of murder, but because of disobedience to divine instruction. His crown was still on his head, but God had already replaced him in the spirit realm. Chosen one. Some of the people who hurt you still have their crowns. They still look influential, but spiritually, they've been disqualified. The throne is empty, and they don't even know it yet. Revelation 3:7 says, "What he opens, no one can shut, and what he shuts, no one can open." That's why they're confused. They don't understand why nothing works anymore, why their gifts no longer open doors, why their once golden touch is now cursed. It's because when God shuts a door, no charisma, no connections, and no hustle can force it back open. Their assignment has been revoked. Take Bill Cosby again, not just as a cautionary tale, but as a spiritual example. His legacy was not only erased from pop culture, it was voided in the spirit. That's what happens when someone violates the sacred. The damage wasn't only done to people, it was done to purpose. And that's what your enemies have lost. Not just followers, fans, or friends, but favor. And favor, once lifted by God, cannot be replaced by strategy. Chosen one. Consider this. What if their punishment isn't their fall, but their disconnection from purpose itself? What if the worst consequence is not imprisonment, but irrelevance? They might still be visible, but they are spiritually powerless. They walk, but there's no fire. They speak, but there's no weight. They move, but nothing flows. Isaiah 14:12 gives us a haunting example. How you have fallen from heaven, morning star, son of the dawn, you have been cast down to the earth. This was written about Lucifer. Once glorious, now rejected. That's the pattern of those who rise in pride and violate divine law. They fall not just from grace, but from assignment. Consider the case of Harvey Weinstein again. Yes, he was legally prosecuted, but even beyond that, his spiritual influence was destroyed. Once a gatekeeper in Hollywood, now a symbol of exploitation and disgrace. That's not just legal consequence, that's cosmic judgment, a complete dismantling of platform and purpose. Jeremiah 17:5-6 echoes this judgment. Cursed is the one who trusts in man. He will dwell in the parched places of the desert, in a salt land where no one lives. That's the dryness they now live in. Their life is a desert because they touched holy ground with unclean hands. Chosen one. You weren't just someone they hurt. You were a covenant, a vessel, an assignment straight from heaven. And when they violated that, they didn't just injure a person, they triggered a divine consequence that no human system can overturn. So now what do you see? Empty ambition, blocked opportunities, a closed heaven over their life. That's not punishment, it's God's correction. They are no longer building legacy, they're living out judgment. And you're still rising, still walking in grace, still covered, because the sentence wasn't meant for you. It was meant to remove the spiritual counterfeit from your path. Now, the doors that were once contested are opening for you. The flow that was once resisted is now being released because heaven has cleared the interference. Deuteronomy 28, 7 assures you. The Lord will cause your enemies who rise against you to be defeated before you. They shall come out against you one way and flee before you 7 ways. Oh, they tried to sentence you, but now heaven has sentenced them. And the courtroom wasn't on earth, it was in the spirit. Case closed. Number 7. They couldn't kill you because you're part of a prophecy, and prophecy can't be cancelled. Chosen one. Let's set the record straight. Your survival was not an accident. It wasn't just because you're tough or because the odds happened to work in your favor. You're still here because your life is part of something bigger, something written in heaven before you ever took your first breath. You are a walking fulfillment of prophecy. You are not just covered, you are called. Not just surviving, you're scheduled. And no human opposition can override a heavenly decree. They didn't fail to destroy you because they lacked hatred. They failed because they lacked permission. The reason you couldn't be taken out was not because the attack wasn't real. It was because the assignment over your life is sealed by divine authority. Does that explain why, no matter how intense the warfare became, you kept rising? Why, every time they tried to sabotage you, something unseen held you up? That's the anointing, the evidence of God's prophecy echoing through your bloodline. Isaiah 5:11 says, "So is my word that goes out from my mouth. It will not return to me empty, but will accomplish what I desire and achieve the purpose for which I sent it." That word is on you. That word is in you. And that word is what preserved you while others were being wiped out. Heaven didn't just protect you. Heaven scheduled you. Let me ask you something. Have you ever wondered why your enemies always seem to underestimate you? Why they assume you're fragile just because you're quiet, soft-spoken, or kind? It's because they see the shell, but they don't discern the scroll. They saw a person, but God saw a prophecy in motion, and prophecy always outlasts persecution. Consider Joseph, the dreamer from Genesis. His brothers threw him into a pit, sold him into slavery, and watched him disappear. They thought they ended him. But what they didn't realize was that Joseph wasn't just a brother, he was a prophecy. And because of that, every prison was just a hallway. Every setback was just a stepping stone. And when the time came, God raised him up not just to survive, but to preserve a nation. You, too, are a preserver. That's why the enemy was so obsessed with ending you. You're not just a person, you're a portal, an access point for divine will on earth. Have you noticed how many times you were supposed to break but didn't? How many emotional, financial, or relational attacks should have taken you out but you kept getting back up? That's not resilience. That's prophetic momentum. Jeremiah 1:5 reminds us, "Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Before you were born, I set you apart. I appointed you as a prophet to the nations." That's not just a verse, it's a verdict. You're appointed, anointed, sent, and because of that, no opposition can succeed, no matter how persistent. Look at Malala Yousafzai, the young girl targeted by terrorists simply for wanting an education. They tried to silence her with violence, but her survival turned into a global platform, and her voice now reaches millions. Why? Because the attack couldn't cancel the assignment. Her purpose made her untouchable. And so it is with you. Chosen one. Every time someone tried to erase you, they were unknowingly fighting against a promise. That's why it never worked. That's why, even when you had no strength left, something deeper kept pulling you through. You were preserved, not just for protection, but for fulfillment. Romans 11 says, For the gifts and the calling of God are irrevocable. That means even your own mistakes couldn't cancel your mission. Even your own doubts couldn't disqualify you. What God started in you cannot be aborted by lies, betrayal, or warfare. Think of Nelson Mandela, imprisoned for decades, hated, isolated, forgotten. Yet, when he was finally released, he became the leader of a free South Africa. What changed? Not the world. The world had always opposed him. What carried him through was prophetic purpose, a divine assignment that waited for him on the other side of suffering. Have you ever felt like everything around you was trying to shut you down? That every new season came with new enemies? It's not a coincidence, it's confirmation. When you carry something eternal, you irritate darkness. Your very existence is an interruption to the plans of hell. You're not here to blend in. You're here to shift atmospheres. Dutimotivianas. Devinis. He has saved us and called us to a holy life, not because of anything we have done, but because of His own purpose and grace. His purpose is your insurance. His grace is your covering. That's why they couldn't finish you, not because they lacked cruelty, but because heaven had already sealed your assignment. Even in entertainment, think of Oprah Winfrey, who faced poverty, abuse, and rejection, yet rose to become one of the most influential voices on earth. She wasn't just resilient, she was prophetic. Her destiny outranked her trauma, and yours does too. Chosen one. The attacks didn't fail because they were weak. They failed because you are necessary. Until your prophecy is fulfilled, you are untouchable. And that is why you're still here on purpose. For purpose, and in perfect timing. Number 8. Their judgment began the moment they touched you, and heaven didn't hesitate. Chosen one. They thought they could get away with it. They thought harming you was just another move in their twisted game. But what they didn't realize is that when they touched you, they triggered a spiritual response system that never misses a violation. Judgment didn't wait for a courtroom. It didn't wait for a confession. It started the moment they crossed the line into holy ground, because touching a chosen one is not just a crime against you, it's an offense against the divine. Psalm 105:15 says, "Do not touch my anointed ones, do my prophets no harm." That's not a poetic warning, it's a spiritual law. And when that law is broken, the response is immediate. Not always with thunder, not always with spectacle, but always with certainty. Have you noticed how things started falling apart for them not long after they targeted you? How their confidence turned into chaos, their plans into confusion? That wasn't karma. That was divine consequence. When God defends, He doesn't need a megaphone. He simply removes His favor and everything crumbles from within. Think of Enron's executives, who once ruled corporate America with arrogance and deception. For years, they thought they were untouchable. But when exposure came, it wasn't just public, it was total. Reputations destroyed, legacies erased, because corruption may last for a season, but justice is patient and permanent. Proverbs 11:21 assures us, "Be sure of this, the wicked will not go unpunished, but those who are righteous will go free." You didn't have to fight back. You didn't have to clap back. All you had to do was endure, and heaven handled the rest. Let me ask you, have you noticed how their blessings suddenly turned bitter? How their best opportunities became blocked? How even their allies started leaving? That's not coincidence. That's divine retaliation. Because when someone dares to attack a child of God, heaven rebalances the scale. Look at Bill Clinton and Monica Lewinsky, an entire presidency tainted by a secret moment. A man who seemed invincible suddenly found his influence slipping through his fingers. God doesn't always judge loudly, but he judges perfectly. Chosen one. While you were crying, they were laughing. While you were isolated, they were strategizing. But in the background, heaven was already writing the reversal. Every lie they told became a line in their spiritual record. Every plot they crafted was time-stamped in the courts of glory. And when it became too dark, too proud, too dangerous, God stepped in. Ecclesiastes 8:11 explains it this way: when the sentence for a crime is not quickly carried out, people's hearts are filled with schemes to do wrong. They mistook silence for safety, but the judgment had already begun. Quiet, steady, irreversible. Take Jeffrey Epstein, a man who thought his money and connections could shield him. But the spiritual realm always balances what the legal system delays, and when the corruption ran too deep, justice stepped in, not just legally, but cosmically. No one escaped divine consequence. Chosen one. Do you know what the enemy underestimated the most? Your alignment. You weren't just random. You were covered. A sign, backed by a spiritual contract. And when someone messes with God's contract, he responds immediately. It may not be visible, but it is undeniable. Isaías 59:19 declares, when the enemy comes in like a flood, the Spirit of the Lord will lift up a standard against him. That standard is what stopped them. That wall is what blocked their next move. That's why nothing they try now works like it used to. That's why their name is losing power. Their plans are unraveling. Their peace is gone. Because judgment doesn't ask permission, it moves by divine order. Even in modern history, look at Richard Nixon, whose downfall didn't begin with the end of his presidency. It began with the first illegal wiretap. Judgment had already started, and when truth finally caught up, it was unstoppable. So it is with those who mishandled you. They thought they were stacking victories, but what they were really doing was stacking evidence against themselves. Nahum 1:3 The Lord is slow to anger but great in power. The Lord will not leave the guilty unpunished. His power isn't always loud, but it is always final. So stand in peace. Chosen one. You didn't need to defend yourself because heaven already opened the case file, and the moment they touched you, the clock started ticking, not toward your downfall, but toward their divine correction. You were not defeated. You were defended. And now, everything is shifting, because judgment has already begun. Number 9. Their delay was their undoing. Time didn't protect them. It exposed them. Chosen one. They truly believed that time was on their side, that if they just waited long enough, if they stayed quiet long enough, if they wore the right smiles and played the right roles, everything would simply fade away. They assumed your memory would soften, that your pain would evaporate, that the truth would grow old and lose its fire. But what they failed to understand is that time is not a hiding place, it's a magnifier. It either covers or it convicts. And in their case, it has done the latter. Have you ever wondered why they kept pretending? Why they moved through life acting as if they did no wrong? As if no damage was caused? Because they thought delay meant escape. But they didn't realize that while they were dodging confrontation, heaven was documenting every text, every lie, every manipulative scheme, every conversation behind your back. None of it disappeared into the void. It was being logged in the eternal archives of justice. Ecclesiastes 3:17 says, God will bring into judgment both the righteous and the wicked. For there will be a time for every activity, a time to judge every deed. Judgment is not delayed, it's gathering evidence. That's the part they forgot. That delay is not always mercy. Sometimes it's a setup for a fall they can't rise from. Let's look at Elizabeth Holmes, former CEO of Theranos. She delayed, didnt, dodged. But time wasn't her ally, it was her undoing. With each passing year, more whistleblowers came forward, more documents were revealed, and what she hoped would fade only got louder. That's exactly what's happening with those who wronged you. The more time passes, the sharper the truth becomes. Chosen one. Have you noticed how their narrative is starting to fall apart? How the cracks are widening? That's not you doing anything. That's divine timing, tightening the trap. The delay that gave them confidence is now what has them cornered, because the truth has weight, and the longer it's suppressed, the heavier it falls when it finally lands. Galatians 6:9 tells us, "Let us not become weary in doing good, for at the proper time we will reap a harvest if we do not give up." Your patience wasn't for nothing. While you endured in silence, God was orchestrating a full circle moment that only time could deliver. Think of Lance Armstrong, once seen as a heroic cancer survivor and world champion. For years, he denied any wrongdoing, but the delay didn't absolve him. It only allowed the truth to grow undeniable. And when it came, it took everything: titles, respect, legacy. Because time, when married to truth, doesn't forget. They thought silence meant safety, that because no one confronted them, they were in the clear. But spiritual justice does not operate on earthly urgency. God is not hasty, he's thorough. While they celebrated, heaven was circling them. While they laughed, the doors were quietly closing. And when judgment hits, it won't come with warning. It will arrive like it had been there the whole time, waiting. Job 20:5, -7 says, "The joy of the godless has been brief. Though their pride reaches to the heavens, it will all disappear forever." Their delay didn't wash them clean. It only let their pride grow high enough for the fall to hurt even more. Chosen one. Have you realized now that God wasn't late? He was strategic. That your silence wasn't weakness, it was a weapon. Every time you held your tongue, heaven recorded your restraint. Every time you didn't retaliate, God added another layer of evidence to their file. Consider Harvey Weinstein, whose predatory behavior lasted for decades. He manipulated silence. He trusted in time. But when judgment arrived, it brought everything, not just justice, but exposure. The kind that wipes out empires and unravels illusions. They hoped you would forget. They hoped others would forget. But here's the divine irony. The very thing they used to hide the delay is what gave God the full picture. Every ignored apology, every unspoken confession, every dodged accountability became another nail in the coffin. And now, when judgment falls, there will be no doubt, no ambiguity, no misinterpretation. Because it wasn't a sudden strike, it was a slow build of evidence they created themselves. Romans 2:5 -6 confirms this. But because of your stubbornness and your unrepentant heart, you are storing up wrath against yourself. God will repay each person according to what they have done. Then, time didn't erase the sin. Time preserved the proof. And now, every lie is unraveling, not because you forced it, but because truth has its own schedule. Their delay wasn't their escape. It was their undoing. Number 10. They didn't survive you. They inherited their own curse. Chosen one. You may not have seen them fall publicly, You may not have heard the sirens, the scandal, the exposed report. But don't mistake the lack of noise for the absence of consequence. What they inherited wasn't immediate collapse, it was something far more destructive, a spiritual curse that walks with them silently, corrupting everything they try to build. You see, when someone touches a life that is marked by God, they don't just commit offense, they activate consequence. And it's not always fire and thunder. Sometimes it's slow decay, quiet chaos, an invisible hand that pulls apart everything they try to hold together. Have you ever noticed how they try to move on, yet nothing seems to stick? Why their relationships fizzle, their plans stall, their clarity dims? Deuteronomy 28:20 says, "The Lord will send on you curses, confusion, and rebuke in everything you put your hand to, until you are destroyed and come to sudden ruin because of the evil you have done in forsaking him." This isn't superstition. This is consequence. You were not just a person they mistreated. You were an assignment from God they violated. Let's talk about O.J. Simpson again, not because of legal outcomes, but because of the energy that followed him. His name never recovered. His peace never returned. Though legally freed, his legacy remained locked in controversy. Because when you touch the innocent with violence or deceit, you inherit a story of collapse, even if no one sees it unfold immediately. Chosen one. Let me ask you, have you ever sensed in your spirit that they're still walking but not really living? That they're still posting, still dressing up, still networking, but nothing they touch has life in it? That's not bitterness. That's discernment. They didn't survive you. They inherited a slow leak in every area of their existence. Look at R. Kelly. Once the king of R&B, for years, he escaped consequence until the spiritual weight of what he did collapsed everything, from wealth to reputation. Every structure began to corrode from the inside out. That's what happens when someone builds on ground poisoned by their own actions. Psalm 37:28 reminds us, "For the Lord loves the just and will not forsake his faithful ones." Wrongdoers will be completely destroyed. The offspring of the wicked will perish. This is not about revenge. This is about divine order being restored. They didn't win. They walked away with a spiritual infection that cannot be treated by image or influence. Have you considered that your presence was their final test? That how they treated you was the proof heaven needed to seal their future? And because they failed that test, they now carry a consequence woven into the roots of their next steps. You didn't curse them. You didn't have to. The curse was in the contract they violated. Think of Ananias and Sapphira in Acts 5. They lied not to man, but to God, and the judgment was swift. Their sin wasn't just deceit. It was dishonor against divine alignment. That's what your enemies did. They mishandled a sacred connection, and now everything they build will betray them. Proverbs 10:27 says, "The fear of the Lord adds length to life, but the years of the wicked are cut short. Even if they live long, their harvest has been shortened, their field has been infected, their seed now produces struggle, not success." Consider Tiger Woods, talented, brilliant, unstoppable until scandal erupted, though he returned to golf. The shadow of what happened remains, not because he wasn't skilled, but because what was done in secrecy eventually changed the atmosphere around him. That's what happens when someone mishandles a holy person. Their victory turns to vapor, their foundation shifts, and the longer they avoid accountability, the deeper the decay sets in. not because you wished it, not because you prayed harm, but because the universe answers to divine law. And that law defends the innocent with relentless accuracy. Isaiah 3:11 concludes with this: "Woe to the wicked, disaster is upon them, they will be paid back for what their hands have done." End of. So don't be confused by their photos. Don't be distracted by their pretense. They're not thriving, they're unraveling. And everywhere they go, what they did to you follows them. Not as a punishment you imposed, but as a consequence, heaven designed, chosen one. You're not just walking in survival, you're walking in restoration. And while they tried to walk away like nothing happened, what they inherited will silently destroy what they thought they were building. Because the one thing you cannot fake is favor, and the one thing you cannot outrun is God's correction. Number 11. You're not their karma, you're their mirror. And that truth haunts them. Chosen one. You've got to understand something very deep and spiritual. You were never their punishment. You were never sent to ruin them, to embarrass them, or to be the reason their lives started falling apart. That was never your assignment. But what if the very reason they unravel every time you walk into a room is not because you're their enemy, but because you're their mirror? What if your light wasn't an attack, it was a reflection? You weren't the weapon, they were the wound. You didn't destroy them, they self-destructed, trying to dim what they couldn't control. Have you ever asked yourself why your peace bothers them? Why your calm feels like a provocation to people who live in chaos? It's because your presence confronts what they've spent years trying to hide. You didn't expose them with words. You exposed them by simply existing. They stood next to your consistency and saw their double-mindedness. They stood next to your resilience and saw their cowardice. They stood next to your honesty and couldn't avoid the stench of their lies. And that was unbearable. John 3:20 says, "Everyone who does evil hates the light, and will not come into the light for fear that their deeds will be exposed." You didn't drag them into the light. They stood too close to you and realized the light in you was non-negotiable, and it illuminated everything they didn't want to face. Think about it. You didn't gossip. You didn't retaliate. You didn't clap back. You simply stayed solid. You healed in public. You walked in truth. You kept moving forward. And that's what broke them. Why? Because every step you took forward made them look smaller, not in your eyes, but in their own reflection. Consider Princess Diana, whose quiet strength and compassion became a mirror to the dysfunction and dishonesty around her. She didn't expose people directly. Her grace did. Her integrity made others uncomfortable because it revealed their manipulation. And that's what your presence does. You don't destroy people. You reveal them, chosen one. Has it ever occurred to you that the reason your name disturbs their peace is because they failed the test? That was you. You weren't sent as karma. You were sent as confirmation. A divine checkpoint, a soul level audit. And when they couldn't pass the standard your spirit carried, they crumbled. Not because you cursed them, but because they couldn't handle what God placed in you. Proverbs 27:19 says, "As water reflects the face, so one's life reflects the heart." You reflected their heart, and they couldn't take it. That's why they lied. That's why they tried to paint you as the villain, because if they could distort your image, they wouldn't have to look at their own reflection. Look at Chadwick Boseman, who stayed silent through pain, worked in excellence, and carried himself with dignity. After his passing, the world saw the depth of who he was, and the industry began to realize how shallow many others were in comparison. His excellence didn't compete. It convicted. Your life does the same. Let me ask you, why is it that they seem obsessed with proving they've moved on from you? Yet they can't stop talking about you. Why is it that the people who once dismissed you now watch you silently, bitterly, with discomfort they can't name? It's because mirrors don't move, but they reflect every movement around them. You're not following them, they're haunted by themselves. 2 Corinthians 3:18 says, "And we all are being transformed into his image with ever-increasing glory." That means you're not just a mirror, you're an evolving one. And with each level you ascend, the contrast becomes sharper. Your light doesn't stay stagnant. It intensifies, and that makes their internal darkness scream louder. Think of Michelle Obama. Hair poise, discipline, and grace weren't loud, but they were powerful. Many tried to discredit her without reason. Why? Because her excellence highlighted their insecurities. She was a mirror to a nation. And so are you, a mirror to everyone who wanted to stay blind. They wanted to bury your truth, hoping time would erase it. But mirrors don't decay. And every time your name surfaces in a conversation, it resurrects a truth they can't bury, that they failed the test of your presence, that they lost their own soul trying to control yours. James 1:23-24 explains this perfectly. Anyone who listens to the word but does not do what it says is like someone who looks at his face in a mirror and immediately forgets what he looks like. You reminded them of what they were supposed to become, but refused to become. And that guilt is not your fault, but it follows them. So no. Chosen one, you are not their karma. You are their mirror. Karma fadis. Mirrors remain. And now, no matter how far they run, they carry with them the unshakable reflection of their own choices. Number 12. God is not petty, he's precise, perfect, and unstoppable in justice. Chosen one. You've heard people say, "Don't worry, karma will get them." But what if I told you that what's coming for them isn't karma, it's something far more exact, something governed not by revenge, but by righteousness? That's why you must never mistake God's silence for pettiness or passivity. He's not holding back out of indecision. He's waiting because his strategy is surgical. He doesn't react, restores. He doesn't explode. He reveals. Deuteronomy 32:4. He is the rock. His works are perfect, and all his ways are just. A faithful God who does no wrong. Upright and just is he. When he moves, it's never random, never emotional, always righteous, always final. Let me ask you, have you ever witnessed someone do wrong, walk away, seemingly untouched, and wondered, where is the justice? That's when faith must speak louder than feeling, because God is not interested in temporary satisfaction. He's committed to eternal truth. He doesn't punish to please you. He corrects to restore universal balance. Consider Enron, a powerful company that for years manipulated markets and lived large off lies. When it collapsed, it wasn't just the result of a whistleblower. It was the slow, steady hand of justice, exposing layers of greed, arrogance, and systemic evil. That's how God works. Not in chaos, but in collapse. Quiet, exact, unmissable. Ecclesiastes 8:6. For there is a proper time and procedure for every matter. Though a person may be weighed down by misery, while you were crying, confused, and exhausted, he was setting the stage. While you were enduring heartbreak, he was collecting evidence. Heaven's courtroom doesn't miss a thing. Now, You might wonder, if God is precise, why does he take so long? Because real justice doesn't just cut the fruit, it digs out the root. He's not just removing a person from your life, he's dismantling the system that enabled their rise. He's exposing the enablers, the lies, the false narratives. He's not interested in a moment. He's after a movement of clarity. Isaiah 30:18 tells us, "Yet the Lord longs to be gracious to you. Therefore he will rise up to show you compassion. For the Lord is a God of justice." God's delays are not denials. They're divine investigations, and when he moves, it is undeniable, unrepeatable, and irreversible. Think about Bill Cosby, whose fall wasn't just about him, it signaled a cultural shift. An entire power structure was examined. That wasn't petty. That was God allowing full exposure so that the next generation would understand truth always wins. Chosen one. Do you know why your enemies keep losing in silence? Because when God corrects, he doesn't need an audience. He's not proving a point. He's enforcing divine law, and when that law is triggered by injustice, it doesn't just shake people, it shifts destiny. Hebrews 10:30 affirms this. For we know him who said, "It is mine to avenge, I will repay." And again, the Lord will judge his people. You don't need revenge. You need rest, because your advocate never sleeps. Look at Harvey Weinstein again, not just as a man brought down, but as a symbol of what happens when the cries of the innocent reach heaven. It took years, but when God moved, no amount of wealth or celebrity could stop the exposure. That's not petty, that's precision. Let me ask you one more thing. What if God's silence in your life was actually him letting the enemy finish their full script, so no detail of their deception would be missed? What if his stillness was not a pause, but a setup? Psalm 9:7, -8 answers it. The Lord reigns forever. He has established his throne for judgment. He rules the world in righteousness and judges the peoples with equity. That means your case wasn't forgotten. It was filed under divine jurisdiction. Some people didn't just lose a relationship, they lost their voice. Others didn't just lose an opportunity, they lost favor. Because when God corrects, he doesn't patch holes, he demolishes foundations built on pride. Look at Bernie Madoff, whose entire empire fell apart, not from a legal technicality, but from divine timing. Justice wasn't loud, it was inevitable. Sonu, chosen one. God is not petty. He doesn't seek revenge. He seeks righteousness fulfilled. And when his hand moves, it doesn't make noise. It makes history. Let them laugh now. Let them lie. Let them gloat. Because when the curtain drops and truth takes the stage, it will be God's hand, not yours, that delivers the final verdict. And when he does, it will leave no doubt, not just about who they were, but about who you really are. Number 13. You were the exception that ruined their pattern, and that's why they still can't recover. Chosen one. Understand this deeply. You weren't just a person passing through their life. You were a divine interruption, a holy contradiction to a cycle they had gotten used to controlling. You didn't break their heart, you broke their pattern. They had a formula, a rhythm, a way of doing things that worked like clockwork. Intimidate, manipulate, control, discard. It worked on almost everyone. They'd perfected it. They assumed it would work on you too. But then came you, the anomaly, the one they couldn't predict, couldn't mold, couldn't intimidate. And that's what cracked their system from the inside out. Have you ever wondered why they seemed so rattled, even when you said nothing? Why your silence enraged them more than your words ever could. It's because they were used to people folding, people begging, people trying to explain themselves, trying to fix things, trying to earn peace. But you didn't chase closure. You became closure. Proverbs 28:1 says, "The wicked flee when no one pursues, but the righteous are bold as a lion." You didn't chase them. You didn't even retaliate. But your very presence, your stillness, your righteousness caused their entire blueprint to malfunction. Think about Rosa Parks, one woman who refused to move. Her refusal wasn't loud. It wasn't violent, but it disrupted an entire system of segregation. One quiet stand revealed decades of injustice. That's what you did. You stood in truth, and their entire operation fell apart. Chosen one. They didn't expect you to hold your ground. They expected fear, but instead, they found fortitude. They expected chaos, but they encountered clarity, and that shattered everything. You weren't just a resistance, you were a revelation. Isaiah 54:17 reminds us, "No weapon formed against you shall prosper, and every tongue that rises against you in judgment you shall condemn." Their attacks didn't just fail, they backfired, because the one thing they didn't account for was your anointing. You didn't need to fight like them because heaven was fighting for you. Look at Colin Kaepernick. He didn't raise a fist or shout in anger. He kneeled. That posture, misunderstood and misrepresented, became a global symbol of resistance. His peace became protest, and yours has too. You didn't scream, but your ability to stay rooted while they spiraled spoke volumes. They were used to scripting everyone's reaction, but you didn't play the role. That terrified them, because control is their power, and your peace stole that power. Luke 21:15 says, "For I will give you words and wisdom that none of your adversaries will be able to resist or contradict." That's why every narrative they tried to build about you eventually collapsed, because God gave you a stillness that couldn't be twisted and a wisdom they couldn't outrun. Consider Serena Williams. Despite decades of criticism, double standards, and false narratives, she kept winning. Not just trophies, but respect. She became an unshakable figure, exposing the weakness of a system that couldn't handle powerful, poised excellence. That's exactly what your life did to them. You didn't just walk away, you exposed the cracks in their structure by continuing to rise. Let me ask you, have you noticed how they try to rewrite what happened? How they try to act like it was all mutual, or no big deal, or somehow your fault? It's because your consistency ruins their illusion. Your resilience is a mirror they can't escape. And every time someone sees you thriving, the lie they told about you dies a little more. Romans 12:21. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. That's what you did. You didn't retaliate, you rose. You didn't fight dirty. You flourished. And the most powerful part? You weren't sent just to survive them. You were sent to expose them. Not just individually, but the system behind them, the environment that enabled them, the pattern that went unchecked until it met you. You are the exception that made their whole formula obsolete. And now, no matter how hard they try to use the same tactics on others, it doesn't work the same anymore. Because the illusion has been shattered. You didn't just survive, you made it impossible for them to repeat. Matthew 10:26 says, "There is nothing concealed that will not be disclosed, or hidden that will not be made known." That disclosure didn't come through argument, it came through your endurance, through your life, through your freedom. So no. They're not just bothered, because they lost you. They're haunted because they lost their method, and it was your anointed exception that made the entire pattern collapse. Number 14. They wanted to take your breath, but God will stop theirs. Chosen one. You were never dealing with just petty jealousy. This wasn't mild envy or innocent conflict. This was assassination in disguise. They wanted your voice gone, your purpose silenced, your presence erased, not because you harmed them, but because your light exposed the darkness in them. They didn't just want to see you fall. They wanted to end your very capacity to rise. To take your breath was not just symbolic. It was spiritual. They targeted your essence. But what they failed to realize is that breath doesn't belong to man. It is borrowed from God. Genesis 2:7 says, "Then the Lord God formed a man from the dust and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life. And the man became a living being." Breath is sacred. Breath is divine. And when they tried to strip yours, they stepped into dangerous territory, not just against you, but against the one who breathed life into you. Have you ever felt like something was trying to shut you up, wear you down, exhaust you into silence? That's not mental fatigue. That was a spiritual attack on your voice, because your voice carries heaven's vibration. Look at Nelson Mandela. They locked him away for 27 years, hoping to silence him forever. But God preserved his breath, and when he spoke again, the world listened. His silence became strength, and yours will too. Chosen one. They plotted, they cursed, they conspired, but they didn't know God was counting every breath. Every attempt to silence you added weight to their judgment. And while they laughed, heaven kept record. Exodus, teletodas teluf, promises. The Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still. You didn't clap back. You didn't curse them. But now the very breath they used against you is being held to account, because God is just. Think of George Floyd. One breath taken changed the world. It sparked a movement, an awakening, a reckoning. Breath is not small, it is sacred. And when people play with the breath of others, they invoke a level of judgment far beyond earthly understanding. Let me ask you, why do you think they're panicking now? Why are their lives starting to feel unstable? Why are opportunities drying up around them? It's because heaven has declared, enough. They didn't fear consequence. But God doesn't wait for confession. He moves when mercy is rejected. Job 12:10 says, "In his hand is the life of every creature and the breath of all mankind." That breath they used to destroy, it was never theirs. And when God is done watching, he reclaims what was on loan. Consider Steve Jobs, a man who built empires, changed technology, and changed the world. But when breath left his body, all control left with it. No genius, no legacy. No money could delay that moment. That's how fragile it all is when God decides time is up. Your enemies thought delay meant permission, but delay only built the case. God wasn't passive. He was preparing. He wasn't idle. He was inspecting. Hebrews 10:31 says, "It is a dreadful thing to fall into the hands of the living God." The moment they tried to end you, they initiated their own ending, not through thunder, but through divine subtraction. Quiet, final, unstoppable. You didn't have to speak. You didn't have to curse. You just had to keep breathing. And every breath you took became another reason God extended your purpose and revoked theirs. Think about Brittany Griner, imprisoned unjustly, but still breathing, still present, still waiting for redemption. Her story was not erased, and neither is yours. Breath proved présence. Présence prouve purpose, and purpose always outlives plots. Isaiah 42:5 says, "This is what God the Lord says, He who created the heavens and gives breath to its people. When God gives breath, no man can take it until God says so. And when He takes breath, no man can give it back. So nu, chosen one. You're not just lucky, you are kept, sealed, guarded by the very breath of God. And while they tried to take your life, they only activated their own expiration date. This wasn't karma. This was divine order, correcting what dared to interfere with God's voice in the earth through you. And when God removes breath, He doesn't do it in rage. He does it in righteousness, quiet, sharp, exact. And now you're still breathing, still walking, still chosen. And their story ends not with applause, but with silence, the very silence they tried to sentence you to. Only now. It's not your silence, it's theirs, forever. Beloved chosen ones, as this message comes to a close, take a deep breath, not just in your lungs, but in your spirit. Let that breath remind you that you're still here, still standing, still chosen, not because life was easy, but because grace never let you go. You were not wrong for feeling the weight of what they did to you. You were not paranoid for sensing the darkness hiding behind the smiles. You weren't weak for wanting peace. You were powerful for preserving your soul in a war they didn't even know you were fighting. They thought they were silencing you, but heaven was sanctifying you. They thought they had the final say, but God already wrote the final word. And beloved, that word is vindicated. So walk boldly, not with arrogance, but with clarity. You were never crazy, you were called. You were never too much, you were the warning. You were never broken, you were being built. And while they were celebrating what they thought was your end, God was already designing the blueprint of your elevation. This wasn't just about justice, it was about your alignment, about revealing who you really are when the world tries to make you shrink. You are not a survivor, you are evidence. Evidence that divine justice exists. Evidence that silence doesn't mean surrender. Evidence that staying calm while they throw fire is not weakness, it's wisdom. Because, chosen one, you were never sent to destroy them. You were sent to outlast them, to outlive the lie, to rise in full view of those who tried to bury you in dishonor. And now, heaven has made it clear, you won without fighting like them. You won by standing in your truth. Look around you, do you feel it? The peace that comes when you stop waiting for an apology and start living in purpose. That's not closure from them. That's confirmation from God. The warfare was real, but your anointing was stronger. The betrayal was sharp, but your covering never failed. And now, you carry a testimony that will disturb every room built on manipulation, lies, and illusions. Because you weren't just spared, you were positioned to shine, positioned to lead, positioned to reflect what cannot be corrupted. So, if this message spoke to your spirit, don't keep it to yourself. Share it with someone who feels like they're drowning in injustice. Remind them that divine justice does not miss. It may be quiet. It may take time. But when it comes, it clears every lie, silences every accuser, and lifts the one who never needed to shout to be seen. If you've walked with us on this journey, thank you from the depths of our heart. Your presence here is not just support, it's sacred. Every time you watch, listen, comment, or simply sit with the truth, You're part of a spiritual revolution that this world can't explain. And to those of you who have gone further, who've donated through Super Thanks, we see you and we bless you. Your gifts help us keep pouring out messages like these to people who need it most. But whether you give or not, know this: your presence matters. Your attention is sacred. Your energy is received. And we are endlessly grateful that you are walking this path with us. This is more than a video. It's a movement of truth, a place where the chosen ones gather. Remember who they are and prepare for what's next. So if you haven't already, make sure you subscribe, not for numbers, but for alignment. Because every message here isn't crafted for popularity, it's forged for purpose. And if you're here reading this, it means you are part of that purpose. You are proof that God still speaks through the unexpected, moves in the unseen, and uplifts those the world tried to erase. So we bless you right now. In the name of Jesus, we speak peace over your mind, healing over your heart, and favor over your path. May every word you've read echo in your soul until your spirit begins to stand taller. May justice meet you in unexpected places. May rest return to your nights. And may every plan formed against you be dismantled without your hands needing to lift a single stone. You are chosen, you are kept, and you are no longer hidden. The mirror has spoken, the pattern is broken. The breath you carry is not borrowed from man, it is infused with divine purpose. Thank you for being here. Thank you for enduring. Thank you for being the exception. And now, go live like the chosen one you are. The story's not over. It's just getting louder. God bless you.